A week ago, I came home from work to find a gift box sitting on our kitchen counter. It was small, wrapped in red paper with a silver ribbon tied perfectly into a bow. The thing is, my wife Emily isn't exactly the leave a surprise gift kind of person. That's always been my thing. Flowers after a rough week, a little note in her lunch bag. She loves grand gestures but rarely gives them. Curious, I called out, "Hey Em, what's this?" She appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from her shower, and smiled. Too wide, too forced. "Oh, that? Just something for us?" she said, walking over and untangling the ribbon. Her movements were deliberate, almost rehearsed, like she didn't want me to notice her hands trembling. Inside was a sleek, black box of luxury chocolates, the kind that costs more than most people's groceries. Nestled between the chocolates was a little note that read, "To new adventures." I frowned. "This is random. What's the occasion?" She shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "I thought we deserved a treat. Don't you think we've been in a bit of a rut lately?" Something about her tone felt off. I should have been touched by the gesture, but instead, unease prickled under my skin. Maybe it was the word "we," like she was trying to redirect some hidden guilt onto both of us. But I let it go. "Yeah, I guess," I said, popping one of the chocolates into my mouth. It was rich and bitter, not sweet like I expected. Later that night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I couldn't stop thinking about the chocolates or the note. Emily seemed oddly distracted, her phone screen lighting up every few minutes. She didn't touch it, though. She just glanced at the screen, then pressed it face down on the coffee table. "Everything okay?" I asked. She jumped like I'd caught her stealing. "What? Yeah, of course." I nodded slowly, letting her believe I'd bought it. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I found myself staring at the little note again. "To new adventures." Something about the phrasing bothered me, like it wasn't meant for me at all. I grabbed her phone off the nightstand, heart racing, and unlocked it. She'd given me her passcode years ago, in case of emergencies. I never thought I'd actually use it. Her recent messages were clean, too clean, almost sterile. But one name stood out, Nathan W. I opened the thread, and my stomach dropped. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. There were phrases like, "Last night felt unreal," and "I haven't laughed that hard in years." One even said, "I can't wait for next time. Same place." That note in the chocolates wasn't for me. I didn't say anything that day or the day after. Instead, I started watching her more closely. She came home late twice that week, smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. When I asked where she'd been, she fed me some excuse about a team dinner, or errands that each lie made me feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Then Friday came. She told me she was meeting her friend Sarah for drinks. This time, I didn't ask questions. I just smiled and kissed her on the cheek before she left. As soon as the door shut, I grabbed my keys and followed her. She didn't go to Sarah's favorite bar. She didn't even head toward town. Instead, she drove to a quiet park on the outskirts of the city. My heart pounded as I parked a few cars back, far enough not to be seen. Emily got out, glancing around nervously, then started walking toward the picnic area. A man, tall, with dark hair and a leather jacket, stood waiting for her. She hugged him, not the kind of hug you give a friend. I didn't confront her then. I didn't scream or cause a scene. No, I sat there in the darkness, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, piecing together every strange moment from the past few weeks, and suddenly it all made sense. When Emily finally came home that night, I was sitting in the living room waiting, but not for a conversation. For revenge. I spent the next 2 days meticulously planning. If Emily thought she could toy with me like this, she was in for a rude awakening. I wasn't just going to confront her and let her squirm her way out with half-baked excuses. No, I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal. It started with small steps. First, I cleared out our joint savings account. Not everything, just enough to make her wonder. Then I packed a few essentials and took them to a storage unit across town. She wouldn't notice anything missing at first. I was careful to leave our home looking untouched. Next, I contacted my buddy Ryan, a tech whiz who owed me a favor. Within an hour, he'd set me up with a GPS tracker to slip into her car. "You're really doing this, huh?" he asked as he handed me the tiny device. I nodded. "If you saw what I saw, you'd do the same." Ryan didn't press further. He just gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Whatever happens, just don't do anything stupid." But stupid wasn't part of the plan. Calculated was. By the third day, I was ready. I waited for Emily to leave the house in the morning, then quietly slipped the tracker under her bumper. From then on, every time she went out, I'd know exactly where she was. Sure enough, the GPS pinged later that afternoon. She told me she was going to a yoga class, but the tracker showed her parked at some hotel downtown. Classic. I took screenshots of her location and saved them. Evidence. Proof. The anger bubbling inside me was almost enough to make me drive down there and burst into whatever room she was sneaking off to. But I held back. That wasn't the moment I wanted. The real moment came 2 days later. Emily was out again, another vague excuse about meeting Sarah. I tracked her car to a trendy rooftop bar in the city. It was a Wednesday night, not exactly the kind of place you'd casually catch up with a friend. But as I sat in my car, watching the entrance, I saw them. Emily, in a little black dress I hadn't seen before, walking arm in arm with Nathan W. They laughed as they made their way inside, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged there. It was like watching a stranger, this version of her, carefree and full of life, completely detached from the woman I thought I married. I didn't follow them inside. Instead, I waited. 2 hours later, they emerged. Nathan opened the door of his car for her, and as she slipped inside, I made sure to capture the moment on my phone. It wasn't the most damning evidence, but it was enough for what I had planned. By the time Emily came home that night, I was ready. The house was dark, silent. She called out my name as she walked in, but I didn't answer. She wandered into the kitchen, setting her purse down on the counter, probably thinking I'd gone to bed. But then she saw it. The note I left for her, taped to the refrigerator. "When you came back from your little date tonight, I wanted you to find an empty house. But this is just the beginning." Her gasp was loud enough to echo down the hallway. She turned around, panic written all over her face, and found me standing in the doorway. "Where the hell have you been, Emily?" I asked, my voice calm but ice cold. She stammered, clearly caught off guard. What are you talking about?" "I was with Sarah. Don't," I snapped, holding up a hand. "Don't insult my intelligence." I tossed my phone onto the counter in front of her. The screen lit up with the photos I'd taken. Her jaw dropped, her face draining of color as she stared at the images. "Care to explain?" I asked, crossing my arms. For a moment I thought she might cry, but instead, she did something I hadn't expected. She smirked. "I guess you've been busy," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. The audacity of her response hit me like a slap. I stared at her, trying to process the nerve it took to smirk in a moment like this. "You don't even deny it," I said, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with this guy. What, you thought I wouldn't notice? Don't turn this into some big melodrama," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You've been distant for months. What did you expect? I needed someone who actually pays attention to me. Are you kidding me right now?" I shouted, the anger boiling over. "You cheat on me, and it's my fault?" Emily rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm not saying it's right, but maybe if you'd been a better husband." That was it. The switch flipped. "You know what?" I said, stepping closer. "Save your excuses. You'll need them when you're explaining this to the divorce lawyer." Her smirk faltered for the first time, replaced by genuine shock. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. "Oh, and don't bother calling Sarah for backup. I already know you've been using her as a cover." I left her standing there, mouth open, clutching that ridiculous note. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, I was done playing the fool. When I left the house that night, the cool night air felt like the first real breath I'd taken in weeks. My chest was tight, not from sadness but from the kind of adrenaline that comes when you finally decide to stop taking someone's crap. Emily thought she could spin the narrative, blame me, and get away with it. She had no idea what was coming. I drove to a motel on the edge of town where I'd already booked a room. It wasn't much. A single bed, an old TV, and peeling wallpaper. But it was the perfect spot to regroup. As I sat on the edge of the bed, Staring at the blank screen of my phone, I thought about everything I'd uncovered. The photos, the texts, the way she had looked at him in that bar, like he was the only thing in the world that mattered. The memory burned, but I wouldn't let it consume me. If she thought I was just going to slink away quietly, she had another thing coming. The next morning, I made a few key moves. First, I contacted a divorce lawyer. A sharp, no-nonsense woman named Claire who didn't sugarcoat anything. "Infidelity makes this easier for you," she said. "But don't let her catch wind of what you're doing too soon. The element of surprise is your best friend." I nodded. Claire's advice felt like marching orders, and I was more than ready for the fight ahead. Next, I called Sarah, the real Sarah. When she picked up, her tone was cheerful, but that quickly changed when I told her why I was calling. "Wait, you're saying Emily's been using me as an excuse to cheat?" she asked, her voice rising with indignation. "Exactly. I just thought you should know. In case she tries to drag you into this mess when things blow up." Sarah didn't hesitate. "You're kidding me. She told you we went to a spa last month? I wasn't even in town that weekend. Listen, if you need me to back you up in any way, I'm here." I can't believe she'd do this to you. I thanked her, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. At least one piece of this mess was solidly in my corner. The final step in my plan for the day was more personal. I'd spent so much time focusing on gathering evidence, making plans, and holding myself together that I hadn't fully let myself feel the betrayal. So, I went back to the park where I'd first seen Emily with Nathan. It was quiet now, empty except for a couple walking their dog in the distance. I stood by the same bench where she'd hugged him, my fists clenching as I replayed the scene in my head. What had he said to her that made her laugh like that? When had I stopped being the one who could make her smile? The thoughts came fast and sharp, but I didn't let them overwhelm me. Instead, I let the anger settle into a kind of clarity. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about me. What kind of person was I going to be after this? Weak and broken, or stronger than she'd ever imagined? That night, I drove back to the house. The tracker on Emily's car told me she was home, and as I pulled into the driveway, I could see the lights on in the living room. She hadn't left for Nathan. Not yet. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up, startled, like she hadn't expected me back so soon. "You're back," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "Where were you all day?" I didn't answer. Instead, I sat across from her, staring her down in silence until she started to squirm. "What?" she finally asked, crossing her arms defensively. "I have a question for you," I said, leaning forward. "What's your endgame here, Emily? Do you actually think you can keep playing both sides?" Her eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I followed you. I've seen you with him. I've read the texts. So just tell me, what's the plan? Were you going to run off with him? Or were you going to stay here and let me keep being your safety net?" Her expression shifted, first shock, then anger. "You had no right to invade my privacy like that." I laughed bitterly. "Privacy? You lost your right to privacy the second you decided to drag me into your lies. So go ahead. Tell me the truth for once. Who is he? What does he have that I don't?" Emily stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "You're acting like some kind of detective instead of my husband." "That's because I don't know who my wife is anymore," I shot back. She stopped, spinning around to face me. "Fine. You want the truth? Nathan makes me feel alive. He's exciting, and he doesn't treat me like I'm just some boring housewife who needs to be managed." Her words hit like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. "And I suppose I'm just supposed to sit here and take that?" Emily smirked, that infuriating smirk that made me want to throw something across the room. "Honestly, I don't care what you do. You've been checked out for years. You think your little flowers and notes make up for all the times you didn't listen? Nathan listens. He sees me." I stood, grabbing my keys. "Well, I hope he sees enough to pay for your rent, your car, and your lawyer fees. Because starting tomorrow, you're on your own." Her smirk disappeared, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "You'll find out soon enough," I said as I walked out the door. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. When I left the house that night, I didn't just leave Emily behind. I left behind the last shred of restraint I'd been clinging to. She thought she was untouchable, thought she could lie and manipulate her way through this. But she underestimated how far I was willing to go. The next morning, I was up early, sitting in the parking lot outside a coffee shop. I wasn't there for caffeine, I was waiting for Nathan. I tracked his address down through a friend who works in real estate. Turns out, Nathan W. had recently leased a new apartment in a posh building downtown. My plan was simple: confront him directly, man-to-man. Around 8:30, his sleek black car pulled into the lot. He stepped out, phone in hand, oblivious to my presence. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who looked like he spent more time picking out his suits than doing anything meaningful in them. I followed him inside, staying a few steps behind. He ordered a latte and sat at a corner table, scrolling through his phone. I approached, my heart pounding but my resolve unshaken. "You Nathan?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He looked up, startled. "Yeah? Who's asking?" I slid into the seat across from him, leaning forward so he couldn't mistake my tone. "I'm Emily's husband." His face paled. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, like Emily, he quickly masked his fear with arrogance. "Listen, man, I don't know what you think you know." "Cut the crap," I interrupted, my voice low but firm. "I've seen you with her. I've read the messages. Don't waste my time with denials." Nathan leaned back, trying to appear calm, but I could see his hands tightening around his coffee cup. "Look, I'm not trying to cause any trouble. If she told me you two were having issues, that's not my fault." I laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Issues? That's what she told you? Let me guess. She said I'm distant, don't listen, make her feel invisible?" His silence was all the confirmation I needed. "She's been feeding you the same lies she's been feeding me?" I said, leaning in closer. "So let me make this clear, you're not her savior. You're just the latest guy she's using to distract herself from her own mess." Nathan's confidence wavered, but he tried to recover. "Listen, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know it was like that." "Save your apologies," I said, standing up. "Just do yourself a favor and get out while you still can. Trust me. Emily's chaos isn't worth the trouble." As I walked away, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Nathan wasn't the real enemy here, but he was a piece of the puzzle I'd needed to confront. When I got back to the motel, my phone buzzed with a message from Claire, my lawyer. "Got the paperwork ready. Do you want me to file today?" I hesitated for only a moment before replying, "Yes, let's do it." That night, I went back to the house. Emily was in the kitchen when I walked in, her face immediately twisting into a scowl. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Out," I replied curtly, heading straight for the bedroom. She followed me, arms crossed. "Don't just walk away from me. You can't keep shutting me out like this." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "Shutting you out? That's rich, coming from you." Emily rolled her eyes. "Oh, here we go again. Are you seriously still stuck on this?" "I already told you, Nathan doesn't mean anything." I held up a hand to stop her. "Save it. I talked to him." Her mouth fell open, the color draining from her face. "You, what?" "That's right," I said, stepping closer. "I sat across from him this morning and told him exactly who you are. You should have seen his face when he realized you've been lying to both of us." For the first time, Emily looked genuinely rattled. She opened her mouth to respond but couldn't seem to find the words. "And while we're being honest," I continued, "I filed for divorce today." Her eyes widened. You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I said, my voice steady. "You've made your choices, Emily. Now I'm making mine." For a moment, she just stared at me, her mask of confidence slipping. Then, as if flipping a switch, she narrowed her eyes, her expression hardening. "You think you're so righteous," she spat. "But let's not pretend you're perfect. You're just as much to blame for this as I am." I laughed bitterly. "You keep telling yourself that if it helps you sleep at night. But don't forget, I've got the evidence, and I'm not afraid to use it." Her face twisted with anger, but she didn't say anything. She knew she was cornered. As I walked out of the room, I felt a strange sense of peace. The dominoes were falling, and for once, I wasn't the one left scrambling to pick up the pieces. Emily might have started this game, but I was going to finish it. The house was suffocating. Every corner felt tainted by Emily's betrayal. Every shared memory twisted into something bitter and hollow. I spent the night back at the motel, my phone buzzing intermittently with calls and texts from Emily. I didn't answer any of them. The next morning, I woke up to a string of increasingly desperate messages. "We need to talk. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You're not thinking straight. Let's work this out." And then, finally, "You're making a huge mistake. Don't throw everything away because of one bad decision." It was laughable. Emily still didn't understand. This wasn't about one bad decision. This was about the months, maybe even years, of deceit that had led us here. I ignored her messages and focused on the next phase of my plan. With Claire handling the legal side, it was time to start dismantling the other parts of our life. Emily didn't know it yet, but the house was about to go up for sale. I had already contacted a realtor who specialized in quick turnarounds. By midday, I was sitting in a coffee shop, drafting an email to the realtor when my phone buzzed again. It wasn't Emily this time, it was Sarah. "I think you need to know something," she said when I picked up. Her voice was cautious, like she was about to deliver bad news. "Go on," I said, bracing myself. "It's about Emily. She called me this morning and she's furious. She said you're ruining her life, that you've gone off the deep end." I smirked. "Let me guess. She's trying to make me sound like the villain?" "Basically," Sarah said. "But here's the thing. She also let it slip that she's been talking to Nathan all morning. I think she's trying to convince him to help her fight you in the divorce." That gave me pause. "Help her how?" "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "But it sounded like she was trying to rope him into her mess. Maybe to vouch for her or, I don't know. Just be careful. Emily's the kind of person who doesn't go down without a fight." "Yeah," I said, the edges of my anger sharpening. "Thanks for letting me know. If Emily wanted to bring Nathan into this, fine. I had more than enough evidence to blow up whatever fantasy world she thought she could build with him." That evening, I returned to the house. Emily was in the living room, pacing like a tiger in a cage. She spun around when she heard the door close behind me. "You finally decided to show up?" she said, her tone venomous. "I don't have time for your theatrics," I said, walking past her toward the stairs. But she wasn't done. "You're out of your mind if you think I'm just going to let you bulldoze through everything we've built. I talked to Nathan today, and he agrees." I stopped in my tracks, turning slowly to face her. "Nathan agrees with what exactly?" Her confidence wavered for a split second, but she recovered quickly. "That you're being unreasonable. You can't just erase me from your life like this." I stepped closer, keeping my voice calm but deadly. "Nathan's opinion doesn't matter, and for the record, neither does yours. You lost the right to dictate anything the moment you started sneaking around behind my back." Her jaw tightened. "You think you're so righteous, but you're not perfect either. You're cold, distant. You bury yourself in work and barely even notice me half the time." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "So your solution was to run off with some guy who feeds you cheap lines? Spare me the psychoanalysis, Emily. This isn't about me. It's about you not being able to handle reality when it doesn't revolve around you." Her face twisted in anger, but she didn't have a retort. She just stood there, glaring at me as if sheer hatred could break me down. "You know what the worst part is?" I said, my voice dropping. "I would have forgiven you if you'd just been honest. If you'd come to me, told me you were unhappy, maybe we could have fixed things. But instead, you chose lies and betrayal. And now you want to play the victim? It's pathetic." That hit a nerve. Her face flushed, and she crossed her arms defensively. "If you're so done with me, why are you even here? Why not just leave?" I smiled coldly. "Oh, I will. But first, I'm going to make sure you feel every ounce of what you've put me through. By the time this is over, you won't just lose me. You'll lose everything." Her mouth opened, then shut again. For the first time, she seemed genuinely afraid. "I'm staying with Ryan tonight," I said, heading for the door. "Consider this your final warning, Emily. The next time you hear from me, it'll be through my lawyer." As I left the house, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Emily might have thought she was playing chess, but she didn't realize she was already in checkmate. The morning after I left, I woke up to a voicemail from Emily. Her voice was trembling. Her words calculated to sound vulnerable but laced with anger. "You're overreacting. You don't get to destroy everything we've built just because I made one mistake. I'm still your wife, and you'll regret this when you calm down. But if you're going to make this ugly, fine. Two can play that game." That was Emily, always the master of flipping the narrative, always one step away from turning victimhood into a weapon. I didn't delete the message. I saved it, another piece of the growing pile of evidence I was collecting. I spent the next few hours on calls with Claire. She was methodical, dissecting every aspect of our financials, our assets, and Emily's behavior. "She's trying to provoke you," Claire said. "Don't let her. Keep everything above board, and let me handle the mess. In the meantime, I've filed for temporary control of your joint accounts. She won't be able to spend a dime without me knowing." Hearing that was satisfying, but I knew Emily wouldn't go down without a fight. Sure enough, she started playing dirty that same afternoon. I received a notification from one of our shared credit accounts, a $2,400 charge at a high-end furniture store. A few minutes later, another $1,200 for a luxury spa package. She was trying to burn through as much as she could before the court locked her out. But Claire had anticipated this. By the end of the day, the accounts were frozen, leaving her spending spree dead in the water. That evening, I decided it was time to make another move. If Emily wanted to fight dirty, I was ready to get ahead of her. I reached out to Sarah again. "Hey," I said when she picked up. "I need a favor." Sarah sighed. "Let me guess. Emily's escalating things?" "Big time," I said. "But I need you to do something for me. Can you check with the people in your circle? Anyone who knows Nathan or Emily. I need to know if they've been spreading lies or planning something." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I'll ask around. Give me a day." The next morning, Sarah called back. Her voice was grim. "I talked to a few people. You're not going to like this," she began. "Go on," I said, bracing myself. "Apparently, Emily's been telling people you've been emotionally abusive, that you're controlling, that you work too much and barely speak to her." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course she is. That's not all," Sarah continued. "She's also saying she only cheated because she felt trapped in the marriage. And Nathan, he's backing her up. Apparently, he's been bragging about how he rescued her from some horrible situation." The anger I'd been holding back erupted. My grip on the phone tightened. "She's unbelievable. She's building a story," Sarah warned. "A way to make herself look like the victim if this goes to court. You need to be careful. And you need to make sure people know the truth." That's when an idea hit me. I spent the next few hours compiling everything I had. Screenshots of texts, photos of her and Nathan together, the voicemail she left me. Then I drafted an email. The subject line, "The truth about Emily and Nathan." I sent it to a select few, close friends, family members, people who would have heard her lies and deserved to know the reality. I kept it factual, professional, but damning. Within hours, the calls and messages started pouring in. Friends expressing shock, family members apologizing for doubting me, even Sarah calling to say, "I didn't realize how bad this was. I'm so sorry." Emily, of course, wasn't far behind. She called, her voice shaking with rage. "You had no right to air our dirty laundry like that. You had no right to lie about me." I shot back. "If you want to paint me as the villain, fine. But don't expect me to sit back and let you smear my name. You're pathetic," she spat. "Dragging other people into this because you can't handle the truth." "The truth," I said, my voice deadly calm. "The truth is that you destroyed this marriage. All I'm doing is making sure everyone sees it for what it is." Her silence told me I'd hit a nerve. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." It didn't take a genius to figure out who sent it. Nathan was trying to intimidate me, and it was almost laughable. But it also confirmed something important. He was feeling the pressure. Good. Let them squirm. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about reclaiming my life and ensuring they didn't destroy it any further. The text from Nathan wasn't a warning, it was a mistake. He'd revealed his hand too soon, confirming that Emily's new knight in shining armor wasn't as composed as he wanted to appear. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was already 2 steps ahead. The next morning, I met with Claire. Her confidence gave me a strange sense of calm, like walking into a storm with a lightning rod but knowing it wouldn't hit you. "Everything's moving quickly," she said, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "The court froze your joint accounts, and we've expedited the divorce filing. Emily's about to learn that legal battles aren't won with temper tantrums." "Good," I said, "but I want to press harder. She's been telling people I'm abusive. Can we make sure that doesn't stick?" Claire smiled, her professionalism tinged with something sharper. "Don't worry, we'll take care of it. Between the evidence you've provided and her spending spree, the court won't take her claims seriously. She's panicking, and when people panic, they make mistakes." Emily's next mistake came sooner than I expected. That afternoon, Sarah called me, her voice barely able to contain the excitement. "You're not going to believe this. Emily's been trying to spin her story even harder, but it's backfiring." "How so?" I asked, intrigued. "Well, apparently, she told a mutual friend that Nathan was planning to move in with her after the divorce. The problem? That friend's husband works with Nathan. And guess what Nathan's been saying?" I leaned forward, gripping the phone tighter. "What?" "That he's just having fun with her. That he never planned for it to get serious." I couldn't help but laugh. The irony was delicious. Emily had thrown away our life together for a guy who didn't even see her as more than a fling. Sarah continued, "People are starting to talk. They're putting the pieces together. It's not looking good for her." "Perfect," I said. "Let them talk." That evening, I decided to make my next move. Emily had no idea I'd been watching her so closely, tracking her every step. The GPS tracker I'd hidden on her car hadn't just been useful for catching her at the park or the bar. It had also recorded her frequent trips to Nathan's apartment. I sent the tracker logs to Claire, along with the photos and screenshots. "This should seal the deal," I told her. The next day, Emily called me. This time, there was no anger in her voice, just desperation. "I think we should talk," she said. "In person." "Why?" I asked, feigning indifference. "Because we can't keep doing this. This isn't good for either of us." I almost laughed at the irony. She wasn't worried about us. She was worried about herself. But I agreed. Not because I wanted to reconcile, but because I wanted to watch her try. We met at a coffee shop. She arrived 10 minutes late, her face carefully composed, but I could see the cracks in her armor. "Thanks for coming," she said, sitting across from me. "Get to the point," I replied, folding my arms. She hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice dropping. "We don't have to do this. The lawyers, the court battles, it doesn't have to be like this. We can work something out. Privately." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean you don't want the court to see the evidence I have against you?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm just saying, we've been through a lot together. We can settle this like adults." "Adults?" I repeated, leaning closer. "You've been lying, cheating, and smearing my name to anyone who'll listen. And now you want to play nice because you realize you're losing? Sorry, Emily. That ship sailed the second you chose Nathan over me." Her mask slipped for a moment, revealing a flash of anger. "You think you're so perfect, like you never made any mistakes." "This isn't about mistakes," I said coldly. "This is about choices, and you made yours." The silence between us was deafening. Finally, she leaned back, her expression hardening. "Fine. If this is how you want to play it, don't say I didn't warn you." I smirked. "Oh, I'm counting on it." That night, the tracker pinged again. Emily's car was at Nathan's apartment, just like it had been so many nights before. But this time, I wasn't angry. I was ready. The next day, Claire called me with the news I'd been waiting for. "We've got a court date," she said. "And trust me, after everything we've submitted, Emily doesn't stand a chance." As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Freedom. Emily's house of cards was collapsing, and this time, I wasn't going to be the one left picking up the pieces. The morning of the court hearing, I woke up calm. It wasn't the kind of calm that comes from peace. It was the calm of knowing I'd done everything I could to prepare for the battle ahead. I'd given Claire every piece of evidence I had, from the tracker logs to the screenshots to Emily's voicemail. Today wasn't just about ending our marriage. It was about exposing the truth. Emily was already seated in the courtroom when I arrived. She wore a sharp navy dress, her hair immaculate, her expression carefully neutral. But I could see the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the edge of the table. Nathan wasn't there. I wasn't surprised. Claire sat beside me, her demeanor cool and professional. "You've got this," she said quietly. "Stick to the facts, and let me handle the rest." The hearing began, and as expected, Emily's lawyer tried to paint me as controlling, inattentive, and emotionally distant. They leaned hard on the narrative she'd been spreading to her friends, even bringing in a character witness who repeated the same tired lies. But then it was our turn. Claire was ruthless. She presented the tracker logs, the photos, the texts, and the receipts from Emily's spending spree. She played the voicemail Emily had left me, her voice dripping with condescension as she called me pathetic and threatened to play dirty. The judge's expression hardened with every piece of evidence. By the time Claire finished, the courtroom was dead silent. Emily's lawyer scrambled to recover, but it was clear the damage had been done. When Emily was called to testify, she looked small, her confidence shattered. "I was unhappy," she said, her voice shaking. "I made mistakes, but I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Claire's cross-examination was swift and brutal. "You claim you were unhappy in your marriage," Claire said, her tone icy. "But is it true that you continued to use the joint account to fund your personal expenses even after the infidelity began?" Emily squirmed. I didn't think." "And is it also true," Claire interrupted, holding up a printed screenshot, "that you texted your lover about moving in together while still married to my client?" Emily's face turned crimson. I don't remember that." "Let me refresh your memory," Claire said, reading the text aloud. By the time Emily stepped down, it was clear her story had fallen apart. The judge ruled swiftly. The assets would be divided in my favor, and Emily's claim for spousal support was denied due to her misconduct. It was over. When we left the courtroom, Emily lingered near the exit, waiting for me. I thought about walking past her, letting this be the last time I ever saw her. But something inside me told me to stop. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice low. She looked up, her eyes red. "You don't understand," she said. "I wasn't happy. You thought you could have it all?" I said, cutting her off. "But life doesn't work that way, Emily. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." She didn't reply. She just stood there as I walked away, her face a mixture of regret and anger. In the weeks that followed, I finalized the sale of the house and moved into a new apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a fresh start. As for Emily and Nathan, word spread quickly that their relationship fizzled out not long after the court hearing. Apparently, Nathan wasn't interested in being tied to someone whose lies had caught up with her. I thought I'd feel vindicated, but the truth was, I didn't care. Emily and Nathan were just chapters in a story I was finally ready to close. Looking back, I've learned more than I ever wanted to about betrayal, trust, and resilience. If I had one piece of advice for anyone reading this, it's this: don't ignore your instincts. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And most importantly, never let someone else's lies define your worth. You're stronger than that.